Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to uncover something totally wild. We're going to see if the fall of the Roman Empire and the 2008 financial crash were actually the exact same event, just separated by 1,500 years. I mean, what if I told you that this isn't just some crazy coincidence, and it certainly isn't just a metaphor? We are going to look at the exact same sequence of steps, playing out exactly like a script. Over the course of this explainer, we're diving deep into 3 hidden laws that have literally been running underneath every civilization, every empire, and every society in human history. And the crazy part? Most people have absolutely no idea they even exist. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with number 1, the hidden code. Then move to law 1, the power rule. After that, law 2, the 250-year cycle. Next up is law 3, mathematical fingerprints. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with civilization's source code. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Hidden Code. History's Secret Script.
So let's start off with a pretty provocative question. What if societal collapses aren't just random, chaotic accidents, but instead follow a precise sequence of steps that play out like a predetermined script? You know, when we look back at the ruins of ancient Rome and then compare them to the sheer chaos on the Wall Street trading floor back in 2008, our gut instinct is to view them as completely different events, right? Driven by completely different, unique circumstances. But what if they're actually just different iterations of the exact same underlying mechanism? Our core thesis here is crucial to understand. These historical parallels we see, they're not just fun metaphors. They are falsifiable mathematical and sociological attractors that literally run underneath every single civilization. These are real, peer-reviewed phenomena we're talking about. We aren't just here to speculate about history today. We're actually looking at the foundational architecture of how human beings organize themselves at scale, and, spoiler alert, why those organizations eventually tear themselves apart. Moving on to Section 2, Law 1, the power rule, the mechanism of advantage. Way back in 1896, this Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto discovered something huge, the 80-20 rule. He basically realized that just 20% of the population owned 80% of the land in Italy. And the story goes, he even noticed that 20% of the pea pods in his own garden were producing 80% of the peas. It's kind of crazy, right? Curious, he went and checked land ownership in England, France, and Germany, and guess what? He found that exact same ratio everywhere. What Pareto had stumbled upon wasn't just some political observation. It was a hard mathematical one. And this brings us brilliantly to the power law. It's this idea of preferential attachment, which basically means wealthy nodes naturally attract more wealth, naturally organizing systems into these incredibly lopsided concentrations. In network science, they often call this the vital few versus the useful many. Think about it. If you have more connections, it's way easier to get even more. Wealthy individuals naturally attract more capital, and successful cities attract more people. It is a compounding feedback loop, and the end result? It's always extreme concentration. Now, what's really fascinating here is how rapid systemic resets, like, say, the French Revolution, violently shift who was actually sitting at the top without ever destroying the underlying power law distribution itself. Back in the Roman Empire, a tiny fraction of a percent of senators controlled the vast majority of Italian land. In pre-revolutionary France, 3% of the population held roughly 35% of the land and enjoyed most of the tax exemptions. And when the guillotine finally fell and all the dust settled, Napoleon just took over. A single node concentrating power even further. And today, the top 20% of American households own roughly 87% of all financial wealth. Even on YouTube, the top 3% of channels are pulling in 90% of the views. The distribution might reset, sure, but that underlying mathematical pattern, it never actually disappears. But to remain completely objective here, we definitely have to note the other side of the argument. Economists like Thomas Piketty argue that this concentration isn't just some inescapable law of physics. Instead, it's a pattern that can absolutely be modulated by human policy. In his view, whenever the returns on capital exceed overall economic growth, wealth concentrates, but interventions can actually shape this. So, while the power law is undeniably an incredibly strong attractor, we have to acknowledge the ongoing academic debate that human choices do play a very real role in its severity. All right, Section 3, Law 2, the 250-year cycle, the mechanism of time. Enter Strauss and Hall's generational theory. This reveals an 80-year cycle they call a saculum. It shows that roughly every 4 generations, a society faces a massive existential crisis that completely rewrites its civic order. Just think about American history. It actually has this hidden secret rhythm. Every 80 years or so, the nation passes through an absolute crucible. You had the American Revolution, then roughly 80 years later, the Civil War, then another 80 years, the Great Depression and World War II. And if this model actually holds up, the period from 2008 stretching to about 2030 represents our modern institutional crisis. Now, when you string 3 of these 80-year sacula together, you get a 250-year megacycle. And that is exactly when major empires throughout history, from the Roman Republic to the British Empire, historically faced their ultimate existential tests.
Now, this cycle is driven entirely by generational memory. It moves sequentially through 4 distinct turnings that predictably swing from societal conformity to rebellion to fragmentation and finally into a massive collective crisis. First up is the high. That's a post-crisis era where institutions are strong and people really just want to belong. Next is the awakening, where a brand new generation challenges those old values they want to defy. Then comes the unraveling. Institutions weaken, culture wars peak, and people just want to separate. Finally, the crisis emerges. It's an existential threat that absolutely forces society to gather together and rebuild the civic order right from the ashes.
And why does this happen? Well, because the generation that actually survives a crisis raises their children in total safety. Institutional memory of hardship naturally fades over those 80 years, basically guaranteeing that their great-grandchildren will face the next crisis starting from scratch. This right here is the engine of the cycle. The hero archetype builds a safe world, but then their children, the prophet archetype, grow up never knowing that hardship, so they naturally rebel against the conformity. Over 4 generations, the living, breathing memory of what it takes to survive a true crisis is completely lost. Memory fades, and the cycle mathematically resets itself. Once again, though, looking impartially at the academic pushback, historians like Peter Turchin warn that this generational cycle lacks precise, falsifiable predictions and is mostly limited to just Anglo-American history. Turchin and others point out that cycle lengths can vary quite a bit, making it somewhat easy to just fit historical events into the pattern post hoc. So while it is an incredibly compelling framework for recognizing these deep societal patterns, it's definitely heavily debated in academic circles and shouldn't just be viewed as some rigid, absolute law of physics.
Section 4. Law 3. Mathematical Fingerprints. The Mechanism of Truth. Have you ever heard of Benford's law? It's a logarithmic curve proving that in naturally occurring data, the number 1 appears as the leading digit 30.1% of the time, while the number 9 appears less than 5% of the time. Back in 1881, an astronomer named Simon Newcomb noticed something super weird. In books of logarithm tables, the pages starting with a 1 were far more worn out and dirty than the pages starting with an 8 or 9. Decades later, a physicist named Frank Benford actually proved this across all sorts of data sets, from river lengths to baseball statistics. It turns out naturally occurring numbers absolutely do not start with digits 1 through 9 equally.
So why does this actually happen? Well, this naturally skewed distribution occurs because real-world growth is exponential. That means populations and economies take much, much longer to double from 10,000 to 20,000 than to just grow from 90,000 to 100,000. It's a fascinating concept when you really think about it. Because growth is multiplicative, a value spends a massive amount of time starting with a 1, a 2, or a 3 before it accelerates through the higher digits to finally reach the next order of magnitude. This is exactly why this logarithmic curve exists in everything from atomic weights to census populations. And this brings up a brilliantly insightful point. When collapsing institutions or corrupt corporations try to fabricate data to hide their epic failures, humans intuitively distribute numbers way too evenly. Doing this completely breaks Benford's law and mathematically exposes their fraud. See, people don't naturally know about Benford's law, so when they just make up numbers, they tend to spread them out evenly across 1 through 9. When Enron completely collapsed in 2001, investigators found their financial statements wildly deviated from Benford's law. That exact same statistical fingerprint exposed the manipulated Greek deficit data submitted to the EU, and is exactly how the IRS flags fraudulent corporate tax returns today. You can try to lie with numbers, but you cannot fake the mathematical laws that govern reality.
Now, a quick caveat here. While it's an absolutely brilliant tool for catching cooked financial books or manipulated deficit data, experts warn that Benford's law is highly debated and often unreliable when applied specifically to election vote counts. Political analysts point out that voting data often just doesn't span the multiple orders of magnitude required for Benford's law to strictly apply. So that makes it a pretty poor tool for that specific use case, even though it is undeniably incredibly powerful for financial forensics. Finally, Section 5. Civilization's source code, tying it all together. So when we synthesize these 3 rules, a terrifyingly clear picture starts to emerge. Law 1, the power rule, ensures that power always centralizes over time. But Law 2, the generational cycle, dictates that as memory fades, those deeply concentrated systems will inevitably break under their own weight. And as they break an inch closer to collapse, Law 3, Benford's law, shows us that failing institutions will inevitably fabricate data to survive, leaving a blatant trail of mathematical breadcrumbs that exposes their impending downfall.
And guys, this isn't just about ancient Rome. This explains why 20% of your apps drain 80% of your phone battery. It explains why 87% of wealth sits with the top 20%, and why our modern institutions feel like they are currently rapidly unraveling right in front of us. These 3 laws are the invisible architecture of the world you navigate every single day. They explain the massive concentration of the digital age, the visceral cultural tension we see in the news constantly, and the lingering distrust we all have toward institutional data.
So if these 3 laws are in fact the underlying mathematical script running every single empire and renewal in human history, the question isn't really whether the next historical reset will happen, but rather which side of the turning are you going to be on? As power concentrates, memory fades, and the old systems completely fracture, a new civic order is always born from the chaos. You now know the hidden code. The only thing left to decide is what you're going to do with it.